And I do really look forward to trying to fill Heather's shoes over the next couple years to try to bring in some really good speakers, hopefully a lot better than I'll do tonight. That shouldn't be too hard of a bar.
Gonna hook you up with your pointer here, all our other details. Cool, that works.
All right, so real quick background just for the few of you who don't know who I am. My name is Ryan Merck. I own and operate Blue Oak Horticulture with my wife Carrie in northern Greenville. I have a horticulture degree from Clemson. I graduated in 2004. I ran the nursery at the Botanical Garden in Clemson from 2002 to 2012. Had an absolutely great time, great experience learning from a whole bunch of really good, really talented horticulturists there at the Botanical Garden. And also got to do a ton of seed collection, which was fantastic. I got to collect seed for the Carl Sandburg Home and for the South Carolina Forestry Commission and for state parks and for the Botanical Garden. And so I really got a lot of exposure. And during that, also figured out that there's not really an agreed upon ethic for what ethical seed collection is in the industry. And so I kind of, in a way, just had to figure that out on my own, which was like great experience for this talk, I suppose. So after working at the Botanical Garden, I've been one of the reasons that I include this community involvement stuff in this specific talk is not to toot my own horn that I've been around for a long time and been involved in the Botanical Garden and other stuff and do a lot of talks. But one of the most important things that I feel if you're going to be involved in seed collection is you really need to build relationships with people in this world. And the way that I've found that to be most effective is through being a member of the Native Plant Society and through coming to meetings and going on field trips and meeting people and volunteering time and going to speak to garden clubs and doing all that kind of stuff. And when people see that you're passionate and you care about native plants, usually they're happy to open up their property to let you come seed collect with them. And that's really, that's the talk right there, right? That's ethical seed collection is you've got to build a relationship so that you get the permission to be able to access the seed that you want. But we'll draw this out a little bit longer just to fill up the time. So why are we here? All right, so we have a minimal supply of native plants. 20 years ago when I first started trying to sell native plants, I tell this story all the time. I collected a whole bunch of seed for the native plant, for the Botanical Garden seed to mountain garden. And so we went out and we collected all the seed. We grew out all these whole bunch of 3-gallon native grasses, and we planted the whole meadow and with everything that was going to go in there. And then all the rest I put in the nursery to sell through the plant sales to bring back, generate some revenue for the garden. And those 3-gallon native grasses sat there for years and nobody was interested in it. And one of the reasons that nobody was interested in it is because they were the only native plants in any garden center, right? Nobody knew how to use these. Nobody was interested in incorporating them into the landscape. And to a certain extent, we still have that today where a lot of these garden centers, if you hit Martin's or South Pleasantburg or, a lot of these really great garden centers around here, they still don't have much of a supply of native plants. And the ones that they do are usually going to be cultivars that were bought in. And so there's still a lack of supply. That's still a big need for little nurseries like me and Carolina Wild and the Upstate Native Nursery to fill those. But there's also still a huge void for other growers to get involved, for people to grow and produce plants and share with their friends and family. So supply is a big one. Also lack of genetic diversity in garden centers. the horticulture industry does not really exist in South Carolina. So we don't have a supply line of our ecotypes going into any of these research programs. If you're buying seed from Prairie Moon, like I love Prairie Moon, fantastic operation. They do things like very, very ethically and very high standards of quality. They are all northern Midwest genetics. That is not what we need down here. And we have a very biologically significant ecosystem here. We're living in the oldest ecosystem, oldest soils in the world, oldest ecosystem in the world. And there's nobody in the Southeast who is really focused on preserving those genetics other than organizations like us. So that's a really important thing to do. And we also, like I said, want to do this in a way that supports conservation and builds community around native plants. And I've found, at least for me, going out and collecting seeds and telling people why I'm passionate about collecting the seed that I am, that's one of the best ways that I've found that I can build that community. And so everybody's going to have a different story, but one of the overarching themes of what I'm going to talk about tonight is get excited about building that community, about what excites you about native plants. So why are we propagating from seed? And this is part of an 8-hour workshop that I do for the native plant certificate program. I'm just going to do a few slides, but why do we propagate from seed? Genetic diversity. It's a large genetic pool. We can pull a lot of genetics together. We aren't cloning and producing the exact same genetic strand over and over and over again. That allows our plants that we grow from these seeds to be genetically adaptable to different conditions and conditions over time as they change. So, you might be adapting to your particular landscape, but as long as we have all of these genetics still existing in our landscapes, then that allows an opportunity for those to recombine, for those genetics to continue to spread around our communities, to, kind of redevelop some of this land that has been developed into something that's reminiscent of a functional ecosystem, at least. It's also very cheap. So seed is economical. You can produce a whole bunch of plants for very low cost. So it's a great way for any organization, for any nursery, as long as it's going to be acceptable to the client. It's a great way to produce a whole bunch of quantity. And it's possible to do large quantities with vegetative propagation. It's very intensive use of vegetative material, but with seed, we can produce thousands and thousands and thousands of plants for not a whole lot of cost. So why are we doing this? Why is it, local ecotypes important? Well, I mean, everybody knows the story of monarch butterflies and milkweed, but it's really important when we're telling the story or when we're landscaping for life that we get things timed so that they're at the appropriate stage for different species for them to be used. So if I'm growing a whole bunch of milkweed from Prairie Moon and I'm growing that in South Carolina, well, before they get really flushed out and a whole bunch of vegetation, the monarchs are already going to be up past South Carolina. And on the way back, all those plants are already going to be died down and senesced before they come back through. And so they're not going to be functionally useful in our ecosystem and play the role that they're supposed to do. And that's, there's so many of these larval host relationships. I mean, everybody knows monarchs and milkweed, but zebra swallowtails and pawpaw, spicebush and spicebush swallowtail, there's just dozens and dozens and dozens of these relationships that are really important. And keeping things timed appropriately is vital. And the best way to do that is to have local ecotype plants. So, all right, this is what we're gonna try to shoot for and cover today. All right, so legal versus ethical. And it's very important that you know that those two are two different things. You can have something that's legal and you can have something that's ethical, and they don't necessarily mean the same thing, right? So legal standards are based on written law. So we know that, legally, I can't drive over 55 miles per hour on the road. There's a written statute on that. Ethical standards are based on a set of moral principles. And those moral principles are going to be different for every single person. And so that's one of the reasons that if you look into, if you Google ethical seed collection of native plants, you're going to get generally, maybe they're kind of all on the same theme, but there's going to be a broad, set of opinions on what moral or ethical seed collection is. So this presentation is mine. It does not mean that it will be yours, but it is mine. So just to clear that. All right. So when we're talking about collecting seeds, any specific action can be any combination of legal and ethical. It can be legal and ethical, great, that's what we're shooting for. It can also be legal but unethical. That's not what I'm shooting for. It can also be illegal but ethical. And we get into that gray area of, is the ethics more important than the legality to you or not? For some people it is, for some people it's not. And then there's also illegal and unethical, and that's the ones that we hope never happen. And at least I feel strongly that the people that are going that route should not be part of the native plant community. They should not be accepted, and they should change their ways, right? All right, so let's start with legal seed collection first. All right, state and national parks. There is no legal collection outside of public research purposes, right? So if you have a permit for public research, you are doing something for the public good, then you can apply to a state and national park and get issued a permit to go collect there. With the Native Plant Society could apply to go get a permit to collect in the national forest or national park. Like when I was at the botanical garden, I had a permit to collect in the Carl Sandburg home for preservation of material for the Carl Sandburg home. As a private nursery owner at Blue Oak Horticulture, I don't think I could ever come up with an argument that would actually get stamped approved at a national park or a state park. Heritage trust sites, it's pretty much the same thing. Unless it's for public use, then you're probably not going to get approved for it. State, there's a asterisk there because I've done this talk outside of the state before, but state and national forest, permitted collection only. There's national forest, depending on what you're collecting. Sometimes it's actually pretty easy to get a permit. Sometimes it's pretty hard. It also kind of depends on who the national forest manager is and whether or not they are in the mood to issue permits or not. So that kind of goes back and forth. And then wildlife management areas, basically the same as heritage trust sites. It's permitted collection only. So now we get down to private lands. All right, private lands with landowner permission. That's by far the easiest thing that we've come across right there, right? And then right of ways, and that reverts to the underlying ownership. A lot of people don't like to think about that, but in South Carolina, if you're driving down a road, that ditch might be in the right of way of a highway, but the underlying ownership still probably belongs to the farmhouse that's 300 yards, across the meadow, right? So when you're stopping in a ditch, legally, you should still knock on the door of the farmhouse and say, hey, can I collect in the ditch? This is your land. Yeah, can I have your permission? A great way that I use to kind of figure that out is there's an app called Land Glide, and it basically works on the tax map system. And so you can, wherever you are, pull out your phone, open up Land Glide, click on a piece of property, and it'll say, yeah, this is Sally and George's house. Sally and George actually live in this house right here. And so I can go knock on the door and say, hey, can I speak to Sally and George? There's a beautiful mountain mint in your ditch. Do you mind if I come take a few seed heads from it? And usually when you tell that story, people get really excited about whatever's in their ditch. All right, so ethical seed collection. All right, to do ethical seed collection, and again, this is my personal rundown, but always obtain permission from the landowner first. I specifically target a lot of private land. One, because it's a lot easier for me, but two, because I want to build those relationships. I like to have a long-term place that I can go back to frequently and ask for seeds again, and usually bring them gifts of plants. And thank you for letting me collect there. All right, so we're always going to obtain permission first. Second, me as a person, unless I am doing a project specific for some type of public entity that is focused on preservation of an endangered species, it's not my role to collect rare threatened species. And I use the NatureServe kind of listing here as, G1, G2, that's global 1 and global 2, like the most imperiled species or threatened species. I do not have a role as Ryan, the guy who grows plants, to preserve and protect imperiled species. That's for the Atlanta Botanical Garden and South Carolina Botanical Garden and the Highlands Biological Station. And there's a lot of really good entities that are doing that work. And I think Echinacea laevigata is one of the best examples of that. That's the smooth cone flower. I mean, when I started working at a botanical garden, there were very, very few like protected and tax sites of Echinacea laevigata. But through the work of the Atlanta Botanical Garden and the Native Plant Society and the North Carolina Botanical Garden and South Carolina Botanical Garden, that species has become much more stabilized through the work of that. And so there's a lot of really healthy protected sites. There's a lot of genetic material and conservation. And all of that happened through the work of that coordination with entities. It did not happen because Ryan was collecting and saving seeds of that species, right? All right, and then when we jump down to the next level, that G3, so globally, that's like globally threatened. We've got the little breakdown right there. So G3 would be globally vulnerable. And then S1 and S2, those species are sometimes fair game to collect, but only if you have a system for amplifying that seed material. So if I'm collecting seed to grow out a flat to put in my yard, or if I'm collecting seed to grow out, a crop to sell in the nursery, then that's not an ethical seed collection there. Now, if I'm growing a plot to work with the Native Plant Society and the seed network to plan out, a block of plants, and then we're going to then go in and harvest seed off that for distribution to nurseries or to the South Carolina Department of Transportation or something like that, then that then becomes an ethical. We have a long-term plan for protecting this species and amplifying its presence throughout the state. Sorry about that, Zoom folks. I just tapped the mic. All right, so those are kind of set aside. If we have like this big picture goal, then yeah, it's okay. All right. Anything below that, that's really what, I mean, me as a nurseryman, that's what I'm focused on. The stable plant material, the ones that are going to be, suitable for going into a subdivision, right? And they don't have to have any type of higher purpose. We aren't trying to preserve and protect imperiled species. We're just trying to amplify, get native species back into our landscape in the upstate. That's really what I'm focused on for the nursery. And I hope that's what, everybody in the native plant world that's not doing it as a professional can get really excited about, preserving and disseminating that plant material. So when I am going up to a group of plants that I want to collect, one of the first things I'm going to do is kind of assess the health of that population. And so I don't want to collect seed off a unhealthy population. I want to have a big enough population so that I can collect 10%, no more than 10% of the seed, and still have enough to be viable, have enough to do something with. So looking for a healthy population and a population with enough numbers to make sense. And then, so if I walk up, nice big stand of this, very common G1 species or, G5 species or, state forest species. The next thing I'm going to be looking for is signs of other collectors, because when we set this threshold of not collecting more than 10%, that doesn't mean that I'm going to collect 10% and then Heather's going to collect 10% and then Rick's going to collect 10%, because we will quickly go from 1,000 to 900 to 890 to and slowly work down. And if we all collect 10%, we can get down to a very, very small number of seeds remaining there without us violating our personal 10% rule. So when we're walking up, we're looking for trampled plants, we're looking for stripped seed heads, we're looking for just signs of other people being there, and then looking closer of, are they actually collecting? Were they bird watching here, or were they actually collecting seed? And that's really hard, but knowing and always keeping in your mind that sometimes you're not the first person there. And sometimes even when you see the seed that you've been looking for, it's still time to walk away and look for another spot, come back maybe a little earlier next year. Bill Stringer guy, I was like really set on collecting this like one pod of this population of Matelia last year. And I know 2 people knew about it. And I got there, and it's like, there is 1 seed pod left. And I got on the phone and I was like, Bill, did you come collect? And he's like, yeah, I was there 2 weeks ago. I'm like, okay, going home. So like that happens, know that happens, and that's okay. Those seeds still, got put to a good use. We can feel happy about that. All right. I may have jumped ahead a little bit. Let's do this talking 3 hours last summer, so I'm trying to be really fast with it. All right, so we're only collecting mature viable seed. Usually that's hard, dry, dark seed. Those are usually signs of mature, but be familiar with what the seed that you're looking for should look like when it's mature. When we're collecting, we want to make sure that we're leaving behind a population that's sufficient in number and health to continue to sustain that population. And again, all of the things that we were looking for signs of people being at that population to make sure that we aren't collecting more than 10%. We also don't want to cause those things when we're seed collecting. So trying not to trample plants, not cutting corners and going off trails and, you know, up and down, kind of, you know, through switchbacks. We don't want to create a problem through our activities. And then another thing that is, I have definitely, when I was young, had a really hard time with this one. Only collect the seed that you can responsibly use. I know when I was collecting for the botanical garden, I would frequently, if there was a 10-acre meadow of grasses, I was gonna butterfly net the whole thing, right? And you know, take back 40 pounds of seed and, you know, be super happy about it. But I could not use all of that. And that was an unethical practice for me to be taking all of that seed material, even if I was staying under 10% of the total volume, even if I was leaving the population in good health. If I didn't have a good use for it, then I should have left it for somebody else to come behind me, or left it for wildlife, or left it to blow away in the wind and hopefully land somewhere that's going to be conducive to a new population of that plant. All right, so I don't know if this format is actually going to work here, but this was fun at Coley, so we're going to try. These 9 scenarios are either legal and ethical, legal but unethical, illegal but ethical, or illegal and unethical. Do we want to be like 5 minutes, right? All right. First one, Sarracenia jonesii. It's a G2 globally threatened species, mountain sweet pitcher plant. And in this scenario, this hypothetical, we're collecting 25 seed pods from a stable population of 50 plus plants from a South Carolina heritage preserve. Legal? Definitely not. What about ethical? Definitely not. Because why is it unethical? I mean, one, it's a G2 plant. Why else? Percentage, yeah. So we're collecting a lot, and it's a protected species. It's not going to check either box. So illegal and unethical. All right. How about we'll go across. Echinacea purpurea, G4 plant, purple coneflower. We're collecting 50 seed heads from a stable population of 50 plus plants from your neighbor's managed prairie with permission. And we're going to say that all of these are mature plants with at least 5 seed heads or 5 flower heads.
I think
Legal but unethical because, from your neighbor's managed from prairie with permission. So we've got permission to be there. So I'd say it's legal. So kind of, yeah, I tried to do that. So like, it kind of depends on how many seed heads are there, right? And so we said 50 plants, but in my head, I was like, when I was writing this, I was like, oh, there's a lot of flower heads on a echinacea mature. It should be more than, 500 heads and the whole thing. But that's a good observation, right? Like 50 plants doesn't necessarily mean there's, and 50 seed heads doesn't necessarily mean that there's, you're staying under that 10%. So it kind of depends on, where the numbers are working out there. All right, Tridens flavus, purple top. It's a G5, very stable plant. We're collecting 1 pound of seed from a stable population of 12 acres on vacant land with unknown ownership. I agree with, does anybody else have another opinion?
I think
You think legal and ethical? Anybody differ? We're consensus? Yeah, I would say this is illegal but
How can
ethical.
you have a commission if you don't know what?
Well, just because I don't have the knowledge doesn't mean that that I am not breaking the crime, right? So there's, even though I don't know the ownership, somebody still owns it. We live in America. Everybody owns something, or everything is owned by somebody. So yeah, I would say this one is illegal, but probably ethical. So that's a good example of, which side of the line do you put more emphasis on? All right, Paul collecting 50 pounds of fruit from 5 wild producing trees on private land with landowner permission. And like a mature wild pawpaw can produce 20 pounds of fruit. Yeah, I'd say legal, but unethical. Yeah. All right. Carolina hemlock collecting 5 cones from 5 healthy trees at Table Rock State Park for genetic preservation outside of hemlock woolly adelgid infestation areas. Permit only, yeah. I don't have a permit for that, but I think if somebody has a permit, then that could be very ethical and legal, but kind of depends on, like, Ryan is never gonna make that legal, but the Native Plant Society, Botanical Gardens, there's definitely legal or entities that could make that legal. So yeah, great observation there. What else? Silver plume grass, Erianthus, collecting 5 seed heads from a secure population of over 100 plants from a roadside with no buildings in sight. Illegal, but ethical. Yeah, that's where I'd put that. All right. God, there was one of these that got real controversial last time. All right, so Rocky Shoal spider lily collecting a single seed pod by an experienced Hymenocallis propagator from a stable population on private land with landowner permission. Single seed pod.
That's illegal and it.
Well, what is that?
It's a G1. Hymenocallis, that's the genus. So like I threw that in there because some Hymenocallis can be difficult to propagate. So I'm saying that this propagator has the experience to utilize these plants. Right? Yeah, it's a G1 plant. So it's yeah. I think that's a good observation there. That was where I was going with it. All right, Celine virginica, fire pink, collecting 50% of the seed from a stable population on your own land. On your own land. 50%, it's your own land. It's stable plant. Yeah, that one I think depends a lot on your personal ethics and what you're going to do with it and all kinds of stuff. All right, and then Echinacea lavigata, G2 plant, smooth cone flower, collecting 100% of seed from an artificial population grown for seed production in a nursery setting. So this is a real world example. This is in my garden. I have a planting of Echinacea lavigata that I've carried around with me for 20 years since I used to work at the botanical garden. And I have one bed of my garden that is nothing but Echinacea lavigata. I harvest all that seed. I don't leave anything behind. I don't leave a bit for the goldfinches. I take it all and I plant that out and grow it out, and usually like wait for a school in Oconee or Pickens County to call me so I can give them a tray of something besides purple cone flower. So even though, and this is like where ethics gets weird, because even though that's a G2 plant, yeah, it doesn't fit that part of my ethics, but it's a stable population that I've planted and I'm collecting everything. It's an artificial population. It never existed on my property. It never should have existed on my property. So I'm growing out as seed bed of it. That's just a good like pointing out the holes in my own ethics. That's the reason I put it in there is, ethics can be not as clear as the legality of, yeah. I don't know that there's any record of echinacea lavigata. I don't know. There's smarter people than me in here about that, but I don't think that it ever came down to Greenville County, but maybe it did. I don't know.
Well, I think what you framed there was, that ethics can vary between individuals. If we're all somewhat ethical folks in some manner, shape, or form, and that degree is always where people, I mean, right?
Right. Yeah. So this is kind of how this was my summary of it. There was one on there that was very clearly unethical and illegal. There was one that was very clearly legal and ethical. There were a whole bunch of yellows that were somewhere, in between. And then there were some with question marks. All right, so our seed sources at Blue Oak. We focus a lot on local collection from private property. Theoretically, we would do permitted collection if somebody ever asked us to get involved in a project that was associated with that, but that's not like a high priority for us. And then next we purchase seed from folks like Native Plant Society has given us seed before. We occasionally purchase from local ecotypes from Ernst Conservation or Roundstone Seed. And then as kind of a last resort, if there's something that's like, we feel like there's really strong draw for a specific plant, then we'll purchase seed from Perry Moon on a like few case by case basis. But for the most part, we're really focused on like, I don't know, 95% of our stuff comes from either local collection from our own property or our friends or from Roundstone or Ernst. All right, how am I doing on time? I'm running out. Yep. All right. I think I'm gonna jump ahead. Just so we have a minute for questions. All right. So all of that was basically get excited, go out, talk about what you want to seed collect, get excited, go share your enthusiasm, make seedy friends, make relationships based on native plants. It's a lot of fun. You meet a lot of really cool people, so do that. All right, so now we've made all our friendships, we've collected all of our seed. We're now back at the propagation, whatever, at our house, ready to process that and not let it go to waste. So first, wet seed, that's going to be your highest priority. Anytime you have a seed coming from a fleshy fruit, usually that seed needs to stay moist. Wet seed in general needs to stay wet. So to do that, it should be cleaned immediately and usually put into, packed in vermiculite or sphagnum moss. We use just 2 parts vermiculite, 1 part water, and the little Ziploc baggies, and we will clean that seed. Like we should probably go over maybe tools. I don't know. So we use a food processor with a dough blade on it for a lot of seeds. So persimmon, pawpaw, all the drupes and berries and, Nisa or black gum and spice bush and all that kind of stuff. I just dump into a food processor with a dough blade in there. A dough blade, for anybody who doesn't work in a kitchen a lot, is it's basically like the blade of a food processor. It's just plastic. And so you can actually sand down those edges and round them over so that they don't cut through the seeds, and they just kind of macerate the flesh. And so it does a really good job of getting that sticky flesh off of the seed without damaging the actual seed inside. So we'll run that through, wash them out good, and then pack them immediately into just 2 parts of vermiculite, 1 part water, and throw it in my seed fridge. And we start stratification pretty much immediately. There's, I don't know if it's necessary. There's a lot of my Americoria species that have like fatty lyosomes on the seed. Usually that's something that you're going to want to remove just so it's not a host for mold and fungal growth during stratification. So, examples of that species like trillium's like the perfect example of that, having a fatty lysosome on the seed. So as best as possible, get that removed off before you start stratification. If any of y'all, I know half of y'all have been to my propagation thing with the native plant certificate. So you've seen all the tools and everything, but having those handy tools available can make seed processing a lot easier, and a lot of them are not super expensive. Screens for washing away pulp, all that stuff, you can make those real cheap if you don't have access to them. Dry seed, there's not as much stress there. You can just throw that in the fridge. Usually I'll do paper bag and Ziploc bag or like Tupperware, just because I don't have a specific seed fridge or a florist fridge. So most fridges work, modern refrigerators work on extracting moisture from in the condenser part. And so that can be really hard on seeds. So if you can separate the seeds from that condensing portion that slowly draws moisture out of the whatever's in the fridge, that's why we have crispers to keep vegetables, not becoming sticks. So anytime you're storing seeds in there, paper and then inside plastic sealed is always a good idea. But when it's time to, clean your seeds, we're trying to remove insects, remove debris as best as possible. Like there's some, Diane was processing rattlesnake or bagging rattlesnake master. It does not have to be perfectly clean if we aren't selling it, right? The only time seed has to be really clean, like perfectly clean, is if you're charging for it and there's an expectation of that cleanliness. For our purposes, getting the big stuff out, getting the weevils out, that's really what I'm going after, making sure that nothing's going to eat my seed while it's in storage. And for that, I use soil sieves for screening a lot of our seeds. They're really handy. They stack. There's, 6 different layers where I can sort a whole bunch of different size seeds. And it's like probably the most fun thing that I do every year is process all my lobelia seeds. And I put all this little bitty, trash in the top and then shake it. And then at the bottom comes out with this like perfectly clean dust of cardinal flower seed at the bottom. It's like, I don't know, if you've never done that, it's the most satisfying thing ever. I don't know. It's better than growing plants. Not really, but it's really good. All right, so soil sieves are fantastic. Box fans can be used by just creating an air column. So you just set a box fan on one side of your garage and lay out a whole bunch of sheet pans in front of it and take your echinacea seed and drop it down at the top. and the really light debris will fly all the way against the wall, and then the really heavy debris will drop straight down, and the semi-heavy seeds will go to the second or third sheet pan, and all of a sudden you've got your seeds separated out by wind column. So it's not perfect, but it helps. And then gloves for sure, especially if anybody ever like tried to process echinacea seeds or rudbeckia seeds, or rattlesnake master seeds. Gloves are super important. There's not much worse than like the little splinters, the bits of seed that you get in your, or bits of the seed head that you get in your hand when you don't use gloves. I have to put that in there since my wife works for a personal protective equipment company. It's like a requirement. All right, so seed dormancies. All right, so we've got our seeds, we've processed our seeds. Seeds are now going in the fridge. So now we're going to break our seed dormancies. And that's like the magic and like one of the most important things of working with a lot of native seeds, and sets us apart from all of the agronomic crops that have been bred to germinate immediately when the farmer wants them to go. So yeah, we still have these either physical or chemical mechanisms inside the seed that are helping them time their germination to the right time in their cycle to germinate and be in a conducive place and conducive time to grow successfully. So plants do that in a couple different ways, but starting with physical dormancy, that's literally just an impermeable layer, hard seed coat that is preventing the embryo of the seed from imbibing water and taking in water so that it can start the germination process. And so, naturally, and sometimes it's CO2 or oxygen as well. But most of the time it's going to be water imbibition that it's preventing. And so usually that's addressed in nature with fire and just freezing and thawing cycles, and digestion and rodents, chewing on a seed, and all of that kind of stuff. So, naturally that would occur over time. We're trying to be a little bit more productive and a little bit more uniform. And so we're going to do what's called scarify the seed, which is literally just scar the seed coat to make a crack in the seed coat so that water can get in there. And that can be, sandpaper, it can be a knife, it can be acids potentially, it can be a brick rolling, a paver brick, rolling it around on a sheet pan. There's all kinds of different ways you can damage a seed lightly so that you don't crush the embryo. But yeah, and this is a really good link of like a guy showing like 5 or 6 different ways to scarify seeds. But it's really not rocket science. We're just trying to break the seed coat there. And all right, and then with all right, with seed maturity, like sometimes you can actually shortcut these things. So like Baptisia is a great example of the last stage in maturation of a Baptisia seed is the embryo is actually going to draw down and separate from the seed wall. And so and that happens after the embryo is fully mature. And this is true with viburnums and tilias and a few other species. And so if you can jump that cycle, wait till the embryo is mature, but the seed coat or the embryo is not drawn down and separated from the seed coat, you can actually harvest that seed. So like scrape it out, put it in a tray, and it'll germinate in 5 days, 7 days, versus having to go through scarification and stratification with the Baptisia. You can just wait till it's in that camouflage stage where the seed pod is changing from green to brown, and harvest it when it's kind of mottled looking, pop those seeds out, and they haven't actually implemented their physical dormancy yet, and so you can get immediate germination. So that's a little trick to bypass some of those. All right. I'm so slow. All right. Chemical dormancy. This is when you actually have you need a chemical change, usually stimulated by either cold or cold and moist, high or low temperatures. All of those things are causing actual chemical changes within the seed that allows the seed to then begin the germination process. So the way we overcome that is with stratification, which is basically just a seed pre-treatment. Usually in this part of the world, like most of the chemical dormancies that I'm trying to overcome, it's a cold, moist 60-day stratification. That gets like almost everything. But it's important to kind of pay attention to where your seed is coming from. So if I get a butterfly milkweed seed from the coast, then it might not need a stratification. If I get one from Colombia, it might need a 30-day cold moist stratification. Up here, it might be 60 days. If I get one from Prairie Moon, it might be 90 or 120 days stratification, because all of that's based on the climate that plant has evolved to grow into. And so, it's a good, like, I love Prairie Moon as just a reference for, they have really good charts and different stratifications that are necessary for breaking seed dormancy. But I'm always keeping in mind, like, all right, where did I get my seed from? Because this is Prairie Moon, and so they have a whole bunch of 90 and 120-day stratifications, where down here I might be looking at 30 and 60-day species that they might need 100 days for. And then seed maturity, again, some species actually need an after ripening period. So magnolia, holly, those are examples of things where even when the fruit is ripe, the embryo is not fully mature. And so you need to actually, you don't need to, but if you harvested that seed, you would actually need to store it in a warm space for 2 weeks, 3-4 weeks after harvest, before you process seed and put it into cold stratification. So that's another thing. All right, and all of that can be found in resources, right? So Michael Durr's Woody Plant Propagation Manual is fantastic. I love William Kalina's Growing and Propagating Wildflowers. That's a really great, beautifully written book. It's like the only propagation book that I'll just like grab and go sit in the hammock and read on a Sunday afternoon, like everybody does. But the problem with that one is it's out of print and it's really expensive. And so Jan Midgley's book is a really great, just like straight to the point reference for that exact same information. And she wrote it while she was in Georgia. So there's a lot of really good relevant information to us in there. I also think the Native Plant Network, Ranger, I don't remember what it stands for, but they have great propagation protocols on that website. And the fantastic thing about that is it's actually written by people who, like, all of those propagation protocols are submitted by people who are actually doing it. And so you get some really interesting descriptions, because, one farm might be doing, I'm a backyard nursery in downtown Chicago, and this is how I grow sorghastrum, or, or whatever. And then the other one will be, I am a 700-acre farm in Idaho, and I'm growing out for a huge seed company, and this is how I grow sorghastrum. And so you get like these very different contextual ways to propagate based on whatever their system is. And you can kind of like draw from those like differing opinions and figure out what's going to be most applicable to what you're doing. Google Scholar is fantastic. I have a great story for that, but I'm going to skip it. So like one of the most awesome things I got to do, at the end of Joe Townsend's life, I got to work with him for the last few years, really closely, working on Shortia, and it was really fun to get to spend that time with him before he left us. But it was really interesting, like, he had all of this like very personal knowledge, but over time, as I was asking questions and collecting more information out of him, he would just like pull out these really old, I mean, most of them were like 1920s and 1930s publications from UNC Chapel Hill. And it was like very detailed propagation protocols for Shortia and for all these different species. And like so much of what Joe did, like I feel like there was this assumption that Joe did everything by trial and error and just figured it out. But there was so much research that he, built off of to gain those skills. And all of that information is just sitting on Google Scholar. Like if you think something's impossible, punch it into Google Scholar, and usually there's a researcher that's done it before, or at least outlined all the ways that you don't have to fail again. So that's a fantastic resource. I can't plug that one enough. And then Prairie Moon, as I've said, love Prairie Moon, a lot of great information, just not the seeds for us. Right. Yeah. Dan?
Hey, wait, today, and he was telling me that he and you and John Fitz need to get together and discuss Joe Townsend, that he feels like he told you part of the story, her part of the story.
Yeah.
Get together.
That's so true. Yeah. That is a great observation. And it's sad that none of us have done that yet, but yeah, we do.
You mentioned about getting seeds from different ecotype regions. Does that, do the plants adapt over generations? When you mentioned about monarchs and timing?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, as long as there's the genetic code available, then, over time, those selection pressures will start guiding it back to be similar, but, that's not an our scale of life, right? That's over hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands. So it really takes a long time to, for those plants to respond to genetic pressures and, find the dead ends. And, there's definitely going to be a lot that, if a plant needs 120-day cold stratification and it's grown in South Carolina, well, that's the end of its genetics, right? It's never going to be able to adapt because it's never going to be able to actually have a seed germinate and respond to that selection pressure. So, as long as it can continue to reproduce, then yes, it'll continue to adapt to its climate, but it takes generations.
Questions for Zoom. Beth asks, any source for further info on short-cutting seed maturity in specific species?
I think so. Jan Midgley's book is a great one for that. Do I need to repeat that question, or is
If you want.
okay? So it's the question about short cutting seed species or different, short cutting propagation protocols, basically. Jan Midgley's book is great for that. She's got a lot of really helpful information. I don't know if I've ever seen any in Durr's, but I would not be surprised if Michael Durr had some of those, because a lot of his work was actually based on nurseries actually doing the work and not necessarily him himself. I think Jan Midgley did a lot of it herself, where Michael more drew from the experiences of industry. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some of that in there. And certainly the Google Scholar is going to be another good resource for that. And people,
I bought a tree from Prairie Moon this summer, and I can't remember where they.
I think they're in Minnesota. They're somewhere up there around the Great Lakes,
Very.
Prairie Moon.
Robert asked, any experience with alkaline versus acid scarification?
I don't do any of that. Like, I haven't really messed with acids or alkalines since I left the garden. Just because I don't like having a whole bunch of chemicals around the house and stuff. So no, I'm not a good resource for that.
I
Awesome.
want to know more about this milkweed monarch. Like, so the butterfly weed that's typically native to South Carolina, like, will they not use it because of the timing? Or is it just
No,
plant types that are not useful to them when they're passing?
yeah, I mean, if a monarch passes by a milkweed with foliage, it will use it. But yeah, I have found what was a really good example of that. Oh, I collected seed of Frangula, Carolina buckthorn, 3 years ago, and grew out a big population, planted 3 in my landscape. And we also had some naturally occurring on our property. And that Frangula came, the one that I collected was from Abbeville County. And this year they both flowered for the first time. And I noticed the Carolina buckthorn was a solid 2 weeks ahead of everything that I had from Northern Greenville County. And so that's just a really like real world example of that timing that happens, that stays in a genetic code, does not immediately adapt over time. And it's still like, I still ended up getting pollination and seed set on both populations. But you know, all of those timing things can be really important for relationships that are just not always obvious to us. And so, you know, milkweed and monarchs is a great example. But it's one of the reasons why I like to I grow from seed as much as possible, and I grow from local ecotypes because I want big genetic pools because of everything that I don't know and I don't observe. And that's why I'm not a proponent of selection of native plant cultivars, is because unless it's a human edible, like I feel uniquely qualified to know what humans like to eat because I'm one. But I have no idea what a zebra swallowtail kind of wants to eat, or what a monarch wants to eat. And so I'm not going to add my selection pressures onto that species when my overall goal is for that plant to fit into its ecosystem and support the life that it's supposed to support. So that's kind of just like my driving principle for why I'm anti-asexual propagation, usually, unless it's some very specific situation of we need to preserve this plant, that there's very few of them left in the world, or it's something that tastes really, really good to Ryan. Like, well, thanks for having me.
Ryan? Yes. So, thank you, Ryan. Great talk on seed. And so while we're talking about seeds, just want to let everybody know that I've been working now for the last 6 or 8 months with the Southeastern. We've created a Southeastern Native Seed Network, and we've been having monthly meetings. So we're starting to work on these protocols that Ryan talked about. And so look for more things happening with that. We're working across a network of 5 states across the Southeast, And, so we're gonna be, and Native Plant Society, our history of seed collection is very strong with the native, with the Forest Service, et cetera, back years ago. So we're trying to get back more into that with the South Carolina Botanical Garden. So look for more things to come and evolve from that. And so this is gonna be a exciting time. We have a seed deficit. DNR says they need thousands of pounds of seed. Forest Service says they need 1,000 pounds of seed. DOT says they need 1,000 pounds of seed, of native seed. Well, where are those 1,000 pounds of seed? Well, we don't have them. And so we're gonna have to start working on protocol, getting numbers up, paying landowners and agricultural people to grow these plants for us so we can get that number up. So we're working towards that in right now. So just stay tuned on that. Thank you.
Who's talking? Oh. That was Rick talking. Rick Huffman. All right. Yeah, troublemaker. All right, thanks y'all. If anyone can help with chairs, I think there was like 8, maybe it was like 8 on each side. And you can take more seeds home, get those from Diane in the back. Thanks everyone for joining us. See you later, folks on Zoom.